Hi, my name's Gabe. So we're comparing and contrasting the 1959 Barbie doll and the 1982 Corvette Stingray design. These two designs are obviously some very, very different things. One is designed by Zora Arkus-Duntov, kind of known as the godfather of the Corvette. Barbie would be made by Mattel. You know, I picked these two because I feel like they're both very nice representations of Americana. They go together, but they don't. One is a doll, and one is a car. Another big difference for these two is marketing. The Corvette Stingray, it was that year, Corvette Stingray was more marketed towards the young professional, which sadly at the time was mostly towards men. Barbie, at least as long as I can remember, Barbie's been for girls. I was not really pushed towards Barbie when I was younger. I think that one of the biggest differences between Barbie and in this 82 Corvette is how the designs are celebrated over time. I've never met anyone my age who thinks this 82 Corvette is a good-looking car. It didn't seem to age well. It really didn't. Whereas Barbie, people kind of celebrate this Barbie doll. In terms of its design, it kind of really set the path for the modern Barbie doll. Obviously, size is a huge difference. Like, proportionally, Barbie is like, I want to say at least 15 times smaller than an 82 Corvette. I mean, the 82 Corvette's 15 feet long. It's not a small car. It really stood out at the time that they were coming out. Barbie was a doll that, you could brush the hair, you could do whatever to, and it was vinyl. Like you could press them, you could mold them. The Corvette, it actually used I don't want to say a similar process, but I mean, the Corvettes at that time were all fiberglass, all of them. So you use fiberglass and then you use a resin, which is plastic. They're made out of very similar materials, believe it or not. Fiberglass, similar to what they made the hair out of Barbie with. I believe they used sort of nylon. Obviously, Barbie doesn't move like a Corvette moves, and a Corvette doesn't, sort of move its limbs like Barbie does. They both still move, though. I mean, just in different ways. One of the biggest similarities between the two is the curves. The 82 Corvette has very, very drastic curves, and so does Barbie. I mean, Barbie's waist is tiny and her hips are big. They were both not very realistic. I mean, the Corvette, yes, it's a real car that really ran. The design was not practical. I mean, it didn't really have a trunk, didn't have a back seat, wasn't that fast of a car. I mean, a lot of modern economy cars are significantly faster. The illusion that this car is fast comes from its design. I mean, it's low and it's long and it's wide. Barbie's the same way. No person on the planet is as pale as a 1959 Barbie doll. Not a single person on the planet. Yet we see it as a real person. It's unattainable. They both really catch your eye. I mean, Barbie stood out at the time. Like, Barbie was the it doll. There's a lot that it could go into breaking down, like nitpicking both their design. They have very similar lines. The Corvette has these swooping fenders. The Barbie has these hips, and then the calves bulge out. At some point, you gotta really start looking at, was the Corvette sort of inspired by like a womanly figure? It's a very real possibility. I'm going to touch on some of my biases inside this assignment. For starters, my age. I am 20 years old. 21 by the time this comes out. I have never seen this original Barbie until this assignment came out. maybe some promotional material for this Barbie movie that's about to come out. Another one of my biases would be that my favorite car is a 68 Corvette. This 82 Corvette is kind of like falling from grace in a lot of ways. I have a problem because I was not alive for either of these when they came out. And that presents a big problem because I wanted to know how these were received at the time. And I obviously was not there. So I went to the first thing I thought of, my parents. So I interviewed my parents about both of these things.
My name is Rose Bidney. I'm Gabe Bidney's mom. I am 53. I live in Portland, Oregon. I'm a Sagittarius.
Oh, jeez. What are your first impressions when you see this Barbie design?
Either she was modeled after the pinups, or the pinups were modeled after her. She needs some sun, and she doesn't.
You'd say she's definitely too pale?
Too pale. Yeah. And she does not look like any of the ladies that I thought I should look like when I grew up. Growing up, my mom always wanted a prissy girl. I was not a prissy girl growing up.
You're more tomboyish?
I was definitely the little girl jumping off the roof, playing in the dirt. If I recall correctly, there weren't any, except for like the baby dolls, there weren't any chunky dolls. There weren't any dolls of color. There weren't any dolls with kinky hair. So there weren't any dolls that looked like me at all. There weren't any dolls that looked like any of the kids that grew up on my street. So these were just things. They weren't, they didn't portray like little girls to me because they were just objects. They might have just have been like a bike. They were just things. The only thing about those dolls that was representative for me were the clothing. Since my grandmother, who I lived with when I was younger, was a seamstress and a tailor, the only thing I thought interesting about these dolls were the clothes.
I'm Kevin Bidney. I'm 57 years old. I am the father of Gabe / Gabriel Bidney. Born in Portland, Oregon, but I grew up in Malala, Oregon, which was a small town of about, at that time when I was growing up, probably about 2,500. It was a what I call a logging town. It depended on forestry and timber, and there were 3 sawmills in the town that were basically the main employers of the town.
Okay. Do you think this design has withstood the test of time?
I think it's withstood the test of time.
I, being someone from the early 2000s, would consider this car extremely ugly. Would you say that?
I don't see it as ugly because you kind of associate the time period when you're young with something like that. You don't want to sit there and say something was ugly. It was still stylish. It was cool. Mm-hmm. Still held on to principles of the late 60s and 70s in that styling.
What we have here are 2 specimens that in the beginning had very similar approaches. They both wanted to sell. They both wanted to invoke a feeling. But their staying power is where they differ. The Barbie had to change over time. Not saying the Corvette didn't have to change, but that Corvette can't change up the time it came out in so well that you can't, like my dad was saying, you have to associate it with a time period. Whereas my mom doesn't feel a very strong attachment to Barbie. Like she was saying, it's just a toy to her. And I want to take away from this that these meanings over time change.